So we'll start here with the sleepers: KJ Osborne, Joshua Palmer, Nico Collins. So Collins in year number 2. There's just not a lot going on in Houston, right? You see on the right, Brandon Cooks, undervalued. I really do believe he is one of the most undervalued wide receivers in fantasy football. You know, you could look at his whole career and just take fantasy aside, right? This is a guy who's with the Saints, and the Saints traded him away. The Rams traded him away. The Pats traded him away, despite being really good on those 3 teams, and now a member of the Texans. And I think a lot of people had questions about Brandon Cooks. Certainly there were some concussion issues and concerns for him. It's nice to see that he was, healthy and able to stay on the field last year. But I think most of the questions were, Brandon Cooks, really good wide receiver, linked to the Houston Texans. They stink. Davis Mills, a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position with him. But Mills is pretty good last year. One of the better rookies, actually. He had some moments. And as we talked about yesterday, in terms of target share and air yards, Brandon Cooks was inside the top 10 in both. He had like 30% target share, nearly 40% of his team's air yards. Those are numbers that I don't think will change. Like, they didn't do a whole lot. Now, Mechie is not going to be with the team, and we wish him all the best this season. But other than that, right, we're looking at Nico Collins, Brevin Jordan. These are 2 guys that I like, Collins and Jordan. But Brandon Cooks is going to be the guy there. He's probably going to finish inside the top 10 or 12 in targets again this season. He will get a lot of volume, and he finished as a top 20 wide receiver last year and the year before that. And I think most people, and I'll be honest, like with my buddies, super sharp in fantasy football drafts, they just don't want Cooks. And they'll see him linked to Houston. They see the quarterback play, see the bad team, and they say, nah, no thanks. I'll take another wide receiver. And that creates value because he falls down draft boards. You can get him roughly as wide receiver 24, 25. And I've seen him go, around wide receiver 30. So I think there's terrific value for Brandon Cooks. Don't be worried about the quarterback play. It's all about volume and opportunity. The Texans will be playing from behind quite often this season, and they will be chucking nonstop. Adam Thielen on the board for undervalued, and Tyler Boyd as well. If you do have the Thielen, you can chuck that up, Tyler, but if not, all good. He's just a touchdown machine. He really is. You got Kevin O'Connell moving over to Minnesota. He was the offensive coordinator with the LA Rams last year. They ran more wide receiver 3 sets than any team in the league, and that will be the case here in Minnesota. Maybe not more than any team in the league, but they're going to run more wide receiver threat sets. That's why I like KJ Osborne, who really had a strong, it was his second season last year. It wasn't his rookie season. I see people talking about it being his rookie season. Now, he didn't play at all in his rookie season, so I understand that. But this is year 3 for KJ Osborne, who was a big part of the game script last season. A new coaching staff in here, but I like his upside, and he's basically free. That's why I got him as a sleeper. I think he'll return value. But look at this for Thielen. He's just a touchdown machine, right? He really is. Air yards, target share, healthy, A-dot, not a big, deep guy down the field, but great hands, runs terrific routes, a red zone threat for sure. Like, Kirk Cousins definitely has a connection with Adam Thielen. 24 touchdowns in the last 28 games for Adam Thielen, 39 in his last 54. He finished as wide receiver 28 last season, 15.4 fantasy points per game. He's going roughly wide receiver 34. I got him slightly ranked higher than that. So he's a guy that, I think he'll outperform his ADP yet again. It's not all Justin Jefferson, guys. It's just not going to be all Justin Jefferson. Thielen's going to be sprinkled in. KJ Osborne's going to be sprinkled in as well. We'll see if Irv Smith can take that leap forward. Back to the board there, Tyler. Take a look at a couple of guys. Tyler Boyd as well is another one that I feel is undervalued. We saw last season towards the end of the year, they really took the training wheels off of Joe Burrow. He was coming from a knee injury, a significant knee injury, and he wasn't chucking as much as he did as a rookie. The offensive line is much improved in Cincinnati. They've done a great job through free agency in the draft over the past couple of years to add pieces to that offensive line. And Tyler Boyd is just a really good wide receiver. He's a slot guy. A lot of the attention, of course, is going to be on Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. These guys are both getting drafted as top 12 wide receivers. And Tyler Boyd's going in like the 50s. And he finished inside the top 40 of the last few weeks of the season. He's a really good wide receiver. He doesn't have the upside to be a wide receiver 2 and maybe just a low end 3. But towards the end of your draft, if you're just looking to pile some wide receivers, injuries are going to happen. You got to run into you're going to run into bye weeks. Hopefully nothing happens to Chase or Higgins, but my goodness, if something happens to one of those 2 guys, you all of a sudden have a top 24, 25 wide receiver in Tyler Boyd. The breakouts, everybody's in on Gabriel Davis. I understand it. Rashad Bateman, Brendan Ayuk. And you see Deebo Samuel is a bit of a bust for me. So Deebo is just, he's a terrific player. And I think the offense will continue to run through him, and he's got incentives in his contract where, if he has 3 rushing touchdowns, he gets a bonus. If he gets 350 rushing yards, he gets a bonus. He didn't want to be treated as a running back. If he wanted to be a running back, he'd be a running back. I don't blame him. He didn't want to take like 12 to 15 shots behind the line of scrimmage, carrying the ball out of the backfield. But towards the end of the season, I actually started to see his rushing yard prop higher than his receiving yard prop. And it was strange from a guy who really averaged like 70 plus receiving yards, before the final few weeks of the season. He was just a guy that, you can get 100 yards out of him, and you only had to have like 4 or 5 catches. He's really explosive with the ball in his hands. In fact, San Fran got a lot of players like that. Ayuk is one of them, and so is George Kittle. But now we have a change at the quarterback position. You go from Jimmy Garoppolo over to Trey Lance, who likes to call his own number, and he's a terrific runner in his own right. He started 2 games last year and he had 130 rushing yards. So I think we'll see Debo get scaled back a little bit in terms of rushing yards, and who knows how accurate Trey Lance is going to be. Say what you want about Jimmy G. He clearly wasn't the answer. But it could be a bit of a learning curve here for Trey Lance as a rookie. And last year in camp and this year in camp, there seems to be a connection with Brandon Ayuk as the deep guy in this offense, higher ADOT. Lance has got a deep ball, deeper than Jimmy Garoppolo. It may not be as accurate, but there could be some Josh Allen comparisons. We'll see in a couple of years if Lance, it can take that leap forward. We've yet to really see him, so how can we even say that? But I do believe there will be some growing pains from Trey Lance at the start of the season. But I like Ayuk. I think he could break out and be a 1,000-yard wide receiver. And Gabe Davis, I was in on Gabe Davis this time last year. I had him, my bold prediction as a top 15 wide receiver. Towards the end of his rookie season, I believe he had 4 touchdowns in his final 5 games. And then last year he came on strong as well. I think he may have had 5 in his final 6. And then he had 1 in the first postseason game. And of course, he had 4 touchdowns in that Kansas City Chiefs game. I would still be in on him regardless, right? As I told you, it's the bold prediction from last year that I was completely wrong on, but I liked what I saw from him involved in the red zone, the trust of Josh Allen. Emmanuel Sanders was signed, and then, it was just, even though Sanders wasn't doing anything, he was just on the field, and it was annoying. And Cole Beasley was there too. Then they bring in Jamison Crowder, and Isaiah McKenzie seems to have that slot role already kind of solidified. And it's kind of telling, right? Isaiah McKenzie didn't play in the first preseason game. Crowder's out there, and Crowder hasn't been able to stay healthy. I do like Isaiah McKenzie, but Gabe Davis does have the trust of Josh Allen. There's clearly a connection there with those two guys. He had more end zone targets than Stephon Diggs over the last 4 weeks of the season. His snap counts had risen in each single week, and now he's into year 3 in this offense, which is going to be one of the better offenses in football. Now, it's a steep price to pay. If he didn't have the 4 touchdowns against the Chiefs in the playoff game, maybe he's wide receiver 35 or wide receiver 40, but I think even as wide receiver 30 on average over at NFFC over the last 4 weeks, I think he's a really, really strong target. And I think he's going to break out. He could, I don't know if he's going to be 1,000-yard guy. He probably won't be. But man, in this offense, I would not be shocked if he had double-digit touchdowns. I would not be shocked. And you want a guy linked to this Bills offense, that's for sure. It's a good stack. If you don't get Diggs in the first, early second, you can get Allen, you can get Davis, you can pair him up with Knox if you're playing some best ball and things like that. Rashad Bateman was on that list as well. I mean, it's just what's going on in Baltimore. They have the cheapest wide receiver room in the NFL. They don't have anybody. They traded Marquise Brown away. This is why we love Andrews, who can finish his tight end 1 again. 1,300 yards, 1,400 yards is certainly in play for him again. But Rashad Bateman, very small sample size, but I really liked what I saw from him last year. Lamar Jackson, right, beefing up. Maybe, he looks a little stronger. Maybe that deep ball is going to be even deeper this year. But you see the note on the right. Current wide receiver group has 118 career receptions. Devin Duvernay's in there. This don't have many options, right? So Rashad Bateman, the air yards in the target share, that's low. I expect, and this is a run first team, but they're going to have to throw the football. I expect the target share to be roughly 20%, at least 20%, air yards over 20% as well. I expect Andrews to be the guy inside the red zone and probably the number 1 option for Lamar Jackson, but you see where he's going, wide receiver 31 on average. I got him as a top 25 wide receiver. Let's bring up that list one more time, Tyler, and then we'll break and we'll dive into other things that I have here. So actually, that's kind of it. Like AJ Brown and Tyler Lockett, right? Tyler Lockett's been boom or bust his whole career with a really good quarterback. I know that there's good value there as wide receiver 40, but give me Kadarius Toney in around that range instead. It's just, if there's boom or bust with Russell Wilson, there's going to be probably more bust than boom with Geno Smith or Drew Lock. Let's be honest, right? I showed you the board at the start of the show with the high ADOT from Cortland Sutton, and he didn't have the same type of season as Tyler Lockett. It was a lot more of bus games and then boom for Cortland Sutton. I think that'll be the case for Lockett. Unfortunately, he's a really good player, but I got some major questions about the quarterback position. And then AJ Brown, right? He goes from one run heavy team to another run heavy team with other options. In Tennessee, it was just AJ Brown. They got nothing out of Julio Jones. There was nothing really at the tight end position. And so you give him a 27% target share in Tennessee. If he has a 27% target share in Philly with the way that they kind of run as well, even though Jalen Hurts threw the ball, I think their preseason game, the first 9 plays were all passing attempts. Maybe that's a statement. I don't know. But A.J. Brown also has Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith to deal with as well. I think he's a terrific player. I think it's a really good get. I just don't think he's a top 10 wide receiver. I think he's going to be like a top 20, middle, maybe he finishes wide receiver 15, 16. He's just not getting drafted that way. And if you're getting drafted as a top 10, top 11 wide receiver and you don't return value that early, I think that is worthy of a bust candidate. And then Joshua Palmer is just a guy that I really like. And I think we'll start to see him grow more in this offense. He was actually the first wide receiver that they drafted for Justin Herbert. Keenan Allen, of course, is number 1. And, Mike Williams is the high upside guy inside that offense, higher ADOT, end zone target leader, top 5 in the NFL last year. And then Gerald Everett's going to be involved, Eckler catching balls in the backfield. So it might be a small role for Joshua Palmer, but we could see him continue to grow. And I think we will inside this offense. Where were the rookies on that previous board? They were nowhere to be found, but I got a couple here, some rookies to roster in redraft leagues. I tried to avoid some of the top dogs. Like I like Drake London. I'm kind of out on Treylon Burks. I understand there's a real possibility for him to lead the team in targets, but part of it is what's going on in camp. I don't want to dive into it too much. I don't fully believe, it's a problem. He's running wrong routes and it's going to take some time for him to learn the playbook. And then there's asthma reports and things. He's a really good wide receiver. And I think over time he will be a really good wide receiver in the league, but I'm kind of out on Treylon Burks. I have no issue with Drake London, even though he suffered the knee injury. I was just trying to dig a little bit deeper in terms of wide receivers that I would like to own personally. And Sky Moore is my favorite Kansas City Chiefs wide receiver to roster. Juju could be okay. He's a couple years removed from 90 plus catches. He's been a pain in the butt over the past couple years to own. I think there's a ceiling there and upside, and him moving from Big Ben to Patrick Mahomes is a significant upgrade. But I'm really excited about Sky Moore. I think I can do a lot of things with him. I liked him out of college. He could stretch the field. They can do some end arounds with him. Bubble screens. I think he's pretty explosive. I think he could be a top 40 wide receiver, and he's not getting drafted that way. The George Pickens thing was actually before Byron came on the show, Brian Cook, and talked up George Pickens, and then he had a pretty good showing in the preseason. He had some really nice things to say, and I agreed. I think Pickens was, one of my favorite wide receivers coming out of the draft, and I think, Christian Watson went ahead of him, and I thought that at the time that was a mistake, and remains to be seen. But a big body wide receiver can go up and get it. He's very physical. There's going to be some question marks at the quarterback play for sure in Pittsburgh, but he's not costing you a whole lot. He might jump up a little bit now with the preseason. That's kind of how things work, but he's still a pretty good pick. I really like Alec Pierce. I know a lot of people like Pierce Campbell. I'm not a huge believer in Campbell. I root for him to get on the field and stay healthy. Of course, I'm not rooting for anyone to fail in the NFL. But this is a guy that just has not been able to stay healthy. At the start of camp, it looked good for him. He was getting on the field in some 2 wide receiver sets, where last year it was just only 3, and they didn't run a lot of 3 in Indy last year, run for his team, and he just couldn't get on the field. And there's been some issues with injuries, and T.Y. Hilton's not on the squad. Some reports maybe they can bring him back, but Alex Pierce, I think, is a guy that's basically free. I would, I have a lot of shares of him, and somebody's got to step up here as the number 2 in Indy. And I think it could be Pierce. Game changers. Already talked a lot about Cortland Sutton. If you're just joining the show, big ADOT guy, Russell Wilson, big ADOT guy, very accurate, one of the better deep balls in the game that we've ever seen here. And I just think it's a match made in heaven for those two. Marquise Brown, right? No DeAndre Hopkins for the first 6 weeks of the season. There's a connection there with Brown and with Kyler. We saw it in Oklahoma. I don't want to dive into that too much. We are seeing this around the league, whether it's Waddle and Tua and Smith and Hurts and now Brown and Kyler and, others that have escaped my memory at the moment, but we're seeing this around the league. Devontae Adams and Derek Carr is one for sure. But Marquise Brown, really good season last year, a breakout season, over 1,000 yards, dealt with some drops, but, much better than Christian Kirk, and will give the Cardinals much more than Christian Kirk gave them. I'm in on Rondale Moore as a potential breakout, and Zach Ertz on the squad with a couple other tight ends there as well. But I think we're really going to see Marquise Brown thrive in this offense. And maybe we're talking about him as a sell high candidate after the first few weeks if he balls out with Hopkins coming back. But I have high expectations for him. I think he can be a top 20 wide receiver, and he's not getting drafted that way. And Michael Thomas, right? Let's be honest. He's a total game changer. We don't know what to expect from him. We haven't seen him in a couple of years. We just don't know. No Sean Payton, no Drew Brees. How's this going to roll? Bringing Chris Olave, Jarvis Landry. There's a lot of different moving pieces there with the Saints. Last year they were a run-heavy team, played at a slow pace, kind of scaled it back from Jameis. Maybe that was part of it. They didn't want Jameis to throw 40 plus times like he did in Tampa and throw all these picks. And he was very efficient last year, 14 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I think Jameis is an interesting quarterback to own in super flex leagues. But Michael Thomas, for where he's going, I think he's certainly worth the risk around wide receiver 37, 38. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but you're not spending a top 4 or 5 pick on him. He certainly is still a very talented wide receiver. Let's see if he can stay on the field. I'm certainly I'm going to take some shots. There's no question. PPR Gold, Hunter Renfrow, Kadarius Toney, Robert Woods, as I mentioned, I do believe Woods will be the lead there. He's a guy that I project over 100 targets in this offense. He's not a great X receiver. It's not really how he should be used. He's a great run blocker. We know that the Titans want to run the football. I just feel like we're going to see a lot of games from Woods where he has 5 or 6 grabs for 60, 70 yards. And that's pretty good in a PPR league. At least he can get you double-digit points for guys going outside the top 40 at the wide receiver position. And I'll be hammering his catch props. I can see it right now. Week 1, 4.5 plus money. Just give it to me. Kadarius Toney. It's the only giant I want inside this offense in terms of wide receivers. I just don't feel like Kenny Golladay and Daniel Jones it's just not a good fit, right? It's Daniel Jones struggles with that accuracy, and I think Kenny Golladay struggles with separation. And I just like Toney, man, in the slot, great route runner. He's going to be a guy I think racks up a lot of catches in the slot. And Sterling Shepard's still in the squad, but just think about Shepard in those games that he had with Daniel Jones over the past couple of years when he's healthy, right? There's been so many 8 or 9 catch games. It was just slot. I just feel like Toney will take that role over, and Slayton will just be Slayton is also an afterthought, but so will Shepard. And then Renfrow in the slot. I think the guy to fade in the Raiders offense is Darren Waller. Honestly, I don't want to, I've said this before a couple times, with Josh McDaniels and how he ran his offense in New England, we could view Randy Moss and Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow as Wes Welker in the slot. I just think he's a terrific route runner. He's got great hands. He's a mismatch in the middle of the field, third down, whether it's in the red zone. But let's be honest. He's not going to get the same type of volume that he got last year. He's not going to get a ton of targets. He's not going to be he had 128 targets last year and 103 grabs, 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns. He had a really good season. He was one of the better waiver wire pickups of last year. But he's not going to be that guy that I wouldn't imagine he catches 100 balls, but I think he can get mid 80s. I think he can get up to the 80 range. I can get 7 touchdowns still. And I think he can get over 100 targets, but he can be very efficient with it. And then stashes, Isaiah McKenzie, KJ Hamler, because no Tim Patrick, very explosive, but he's dealt with some injuries. Let's see if he can get on the field. Romeo Dobbs would be like, stash? What do you mean? This guy's climbing up draft boards. How can I even just roster him and stash him? If he gets to the point where he's more expensive than Christian Watson, maybe I just take Watson. But Dobbs is a guy that I do believe is worthy of a late round pick, and it could take some time for him to build the trust with Aaron Rodgers. And then Isaiah McKenzie is another guy, right, who's jumped up draft board significantly over the past few weeks, but I think he's kind of got that slot role locked in. Could be some inconsistencies from him in games. I don't know if he's going to be a guy that you can really trust to roll in. It's maybe just a flex guy in a PPR league, things like that. But you want a guy linked to this Bills offense, as I mentioned earlier, and a cheap play there. All right, that's it. We're saying goodbye to wide receivers.